The howling wind carried voices Eleanor would never hear again. The wagon wheels had stopped their familiar creaking hours ago, replaced by the merciless symphony of the blizzard. Each snowflake that landed on her outstretched palm told the same story. She had been left behind, abandoned, forgotten in the rush to outrun winter's first deadly storm. "William!" Her voice shattered against the wall of wind. "Emma! Thomas!" The names of her husband and children tore from her throat until it was raw, but the storm swallowed her cries without mercy. Eleanor Montgomery sank to her knees in the snow, her hands trembling with cold and terror. The wagon train bound for Prosperity Creek had been her last hope, a chance for a new beginning after William had lost their farm in Kansas. Now she was alone in the Dakota Territory wilderness, her world shrouded in darkness, both real and metaphorical. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The blizzard had struck without warning, transforming a crisp autumn day into a maelstrom of ice and confusion. Eleanor remembered the panic, the shouts of men, the frightened whinnying of horses, her own children crying as William guided their wagon through the chaos. She had fallen somehow, a sudden lurch, a moment of weightlessness, then the brutal impact of frozen earth. By the time she had regained her senses, the sounds of the caravan had faded to nothing, leaving only the voice of the wind. Eleanor had lost her sight to scarlet fever at 16, but she had never felt truly blind until this moment. Her other senses, usually so reliable, were overwhelmed by the storm's fury. The cold penetrated her woolen dress, her threadbare coat offering little protection against the Dakota winter. "Think, Ellie," she whispered to herself, using the nickname her father had given her long ago. "You can't stay here." She forced herself to her feet, her fingers clutching her walking stick, a polished oak branch William had carved for her. When they married, it had been a constant companion for 8 years, but it seemed woefully inadequate against the wilderness surrounding her now. Eleanor took a tentative step, then another. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she moved in what she hoped was the direction the wagons had gone. But with each passing minute, the cold crept deeper into her bones, and doubt clouded her mind as thoroughly as the storm clouded the sky. After what felt like hours, her strength began to fail. Her lips were numb, her fingers stiff within her mittens. When she stumbled over a hidden rock and fell face first into a snowdrift, Eleanor wasn't sure she could rise again. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the children she might never see again. "I tried." The snow felt almost warm now, a deceptive comfort she recognized as danger. As consciousness began to slip away, Eleanor became aware of something different in the soundscape of the storm. Footsteps, light and deliberate, approaching with purpose rather than chance. She held her breath, straining to hear past the wind's howl. The footsteps stopped. Eleanor sensed a presence nearby, someone watching, evaluating. "Hello," she called, her voice weak. "Please, help me." Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring in winter. Then a voice spoke, deep and measured, each word carefully formed. "You are far from your people." A man's voice, accented but clear. Eleanor turned toward the sound, hope and fear battling within her. Yes, the wagons, my family, the storm separated us. The white man's caravans passed north. The voice moved closer. "They do not return for you." "No," Eleanor protested, though doubt gnawed at her. "They wouldn't leave me. William wouldn't." "The snow covers their tracks already," the man interrupted, "and the wolves come with nightfall." A new fear clutched at Eleanor's heart. "Wolves? This is their hunting ground." A pause, then, "You cannot see." It wasn't a question. Eleanor swallowed hard. "No, not since I was 16. Another silence, this one contemplative. She imagined unknown eyes studying her, weighing options. perhaps considering leaving her to the fate the storm had chosen. "I am Dakota," the man said finally. "You will die here without help." The blunt assessment should have frightened her, but Eleanor found unexpected comfort in its honesty. "Eleanor Montgomery," she replied, "though most call me Ellie. Can you stand, Eleanor Montgomery?" She tried, but her legs buckled beneath her. Before she could fall, strong hands grasped her arms, steadying her. Eleanor flinched at the unexpected contact, then relaxed as Dakota helped her to her feet. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," he replied. "The journey is long, and the spirits of this land do not welcome your kind. Where are we going?" "Away from death," Dakota said simply. "That is enough for now." He placed her hand on his arm, his skin warm through the leather of his sleeve. With her other hand gripping her walking stick, Eleanor took her, first uncertain steps into a new reality, one where her survival depended entirely on a stranger whose face she would never see. Dakota set a pace that challenged Eleanor's endurance. The storm had abated somewhat, but the wind still bit through her clothes, and the snow made each step treacherous. She stumbled often, her walking stick finding hidden obstacles too. Late, each time she faltered, Dakota's grip would tighten, keeping her upright, never commenting on her clumsiness. "How far?" she gasped after what felt like miles. "Questions waste breath," he replied. "Breath makes warmth. You need warmth." Eleanor fell silent, focusing instead on matching her steps to his. Gradually, she became aware of changes in their surroundings. The wind's howl diminished, replaced by the whisper of pine needles. The ground beneath her feet grew firmer, less yielding. They were entering a forest. "Stop!" Dakota commanded suddenly. His hand left her arm, and Eleanor heard him moving away, his footsteps nearly silent despite the snow. She stood motionless, fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. What if he didn't return? What if this had been his plan all along? To abandon her in an unfamiliar place where she had no hope of finding her way. But before her fears could take root, Dakota returned. "This way," he said, reclaiming her arm. "Shelter waits." He guided her forward, then downward. Eleanor's boots scraped against stone as the ground sloped beneath her feet. The air changed, still cold, but without the wind's knife edge. The sound of her breathing echoed slightly, suggesting enclosed space. "A cave?" she asked. "Yes." The sound of movement followed, leather against stone, the soft clink of metal objects. "Sit." Eleanor lowered herself cautiously, finding a relatively flat rock beneath her. She listened as Dakota moved around the space, recognizing the sounds of fire-making. Soon, the welcome scent of smoke reached her, followed by the first, tentative warmth of flames. "Your clothes are wet," Dakota observed. "They will kill you if not dried." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself protectively. "I'm fine." "Pride before death," he replied, unmoved. "I will turn away." The matter-of-fact practicality in his voice stripped the situation of impropriety. Eleanor realized he was right. Her sodden skirts and petticoats were already stiffening, with ice. With numbed fingers, she began unlacing her boots. "There is a blanket beside you," Dakota said, his voice now coming from farther away. "Fur on one side. Use it." Eleanor found the blanket. Buffalo hide, she realized, thick and surprisingly soft. As quickly as her cold, clumsy hands allowed, she removed her outer garments, wrapping the hide around herself, before removing her wet underclothes as well. The fur against her skin felt strange, but wonderfully warm. I've finished," she said, her cheeks burning despite the cold. The sound of Dakota's footsteps approached again. Something warm pressed into her hands, a cup of some kind filled with hot liquid. "Drink," he instructed. "Pine and honey. It will warm you from within." Eleanor sipped cautiously. The tea was bitter yet sweet, with a resinous quality that opened her lungs and sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, drinking more deeply. Dakota moved around the cave, hanging her clothes near the fire to dry. His efficiency suggested routine, a man accustomed to survival in harsh conditions. "You know these lands well," Eleanor observed, seeking conversation to distract from her vulnerability. "They are mine," he replied simply. "My people walked. Here before yours came with paper claims and iron horses. You're Lakota," she said, remembering stories from settlers who had passed through Indian territories. "Yes." The word held neither pride nor shame, merely fact. Eleanor hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her since their meeting. "Why did you help me? Most stories I've heard." She trailed off, suddenly aware of how offensive her words might sound. "Speak your mind," Dakota said, his tone unchanged. "The stories say your people hate settlers, that you attack caravans and—" She swallowed hard. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Kill those who trespass on your lands." Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. When Dakota finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of generations. "Your people speak of hate, yet bring it with them like valuable cargo. They see enemies in faces, unlike their own." A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks upward. "I helped you because you would have died without help, no more, no less." "But surely there's more to it than that," Eleanor pressed. "You could have left me. Could you leave a wounded fawn to wolves, a bird with broken wing to serpents?" Dakota's voice held genuine curiosity, even knowing neither would survive the coming moon. The question struck Eleanor as profound in its simplicity. "No," she admitted, "I couldn't." "Then you understand," Dakota concluded. "Rest now. Dawn brings a longer journey." Eleanor wanted to ask more about this journey, about his people, about the chances of finding her family, but exhaustion claimed her before she could form the words. Wrapped in buffalo hide beside a stranger's fire, she slipped into dreams, haunted by the echoes of wagon wheels and children's voices carried away on the wind. Eleanor woke to the sound of movement, quiet, deliberate footsteps, and the soft rustle of fabric. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Where was William's familiar snoring? Emma's sleep-mumbled words? Then memory crashed through the fog of sleep. The storm, the fall, the abandonment, and Dakota. She sat up quickly, clutching the buffalo hide around her shoulders. "Good morning," she ventured, unsure if it was even morning at all within the cave. "Sun rises," Dakota confirmed. "Your clothes are dry. We leave soon." Eleanor felt around, her finding her garments neatly folded beside her makeshift bed. They were indeed dry and surprisingly warm to the touch. "Thank you. I'll dress quickly." "Food first," Dakota said, approaching with steady steps. Something was pressed into her hands, a piece of flat bread and what felt like dried meat. "Eat all. The path ahead is difficult." Eleanor ate without complaint, though the jerky was tougher than any she'd had before, with an unfamiliar, gamey flavor. As she finished, curiosity got the better of her. "Where are we going?" "West," Dakota replied, "to find your people, if they live." Hope leapt within her. "You'll help me find my family?" "I will take you to where wagons go," he clarified. "Prosperity Creek, the mining settlement." "That's where we were headed," Eleanor confirmed, excitement building. "How far is it?" 7 days if the weather holds, longer if not." 7 days. The enormity of the journey ahead settled over Eleanor like a weight. 7 days of walking. Through wilderness she couldn't see, dependent on a man she barely knew. Yet what choice did she have? "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Take me all that way?" Dakota was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice carried a new quality, something almost like reluctance. I journey west already, to my people's winter camp beyond the Black Hills. Our paths align for now. It wasn't the whole truth. Eleanor had developed a keen ear for the things people left unsaid, but she didn't press. Instead, she rose and said simply, "I'm ready when you are." After dressing and wrapping herself in her now dry coat, Eleanor followed Dakota from the cave into the crisp morning air. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed world. Though she couldn't see it, she could feel the difference, the pristine hush that follows heavy snow, the way sounds, carried clearly through the still air, the particular crunch beneath her boots. "The sky is clear," Dakota observed, perhaps sensing her curiosity about their surroundings. "Blue as quail's egg, sun bright on snow." The small kindness of description touched Eleanor unexpectedly. Most people avoided mentioning visual details around her, as though the reminder of what she couldn't see might cause pain. But Dakota's words painted pictures in her mind, without pity or awkwardness. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing for me." Dakota made a non-committal sound, but his next words held a trace of warmth. "Your stick, it is good work. The wood speaks of many journeys." Eleanor ran her fingers over the polished oak of her walking stick, feeling the smooth grain beneath her touch. "My husband made it for me when we married. Said a new life deserved a new way of finding the path. He knows the value of good tools." Yes, William is practical that way. Eleanor's voice faltered as grief threatened to overwhelm her. Were her family alive? Had they searched for her before the storm forced them onward, or had they simply continued to Prosperity Creek, assuming she was lost forever? As if reading her thoughts, Dakota said, "The wagon trail leads northwest. They would seek shelter at the trading post near Thunder Creek before continuing." "How do you know where they went?" "I know where all who cross these lands go," Dakota replied. "It is necessary for survival." They walked in silence after, the Dakota occasionally guiding Eleanor around obstacles or warning of difficult terrain ahead. The forest gradually thinned, giving way to open country where the wind returned, though lacking yesterday's vicious bite. By midday, Eleanor's legs ached with exertion and her stomach growled with hunger. Just as she was about to request a rest, Dakota stopped. "We eat here," he announced. "Sun is high." They shared a simple meal of pemmican and more of the pine. Tea, which Dakota prepared using snow, melted over a small fire. As they ate, Eleanor gathered her courage to ask the question that had been troubling her. "Dakota, you said you're going to your people's winter camp, but you're alone. Why don't you travel with your family?" The silence that followed was different from his previous contemplative pauses. Heavier, charged with emotion, Eleanor couldn't identify. "I have been away," he finally said, each word carefully measured. "In the white man's school where they cut our hair and forbid our language." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "4 winters. I lived there," Dakota continued, as though needing to speak now that he had begun. "They called me John, said Dakota was dead, that only John could live in their world." "That's terrible," Eleanor whispered, genuinely horrified. "I escaped when they moved us to a new building, ran 3 nights without stopping." A hint of pride entered his voice. "They searched, but the land remembers her children. She hid me." Eleanor felt a new understanding dawning. "So, you're going home?" "Yes." The word held both certainty and question. "If home remains." The implication was clear. After 4 years, Dakota wasn't sure what reception awaited him, or if his family even survived. They were both journeying toward uncertain reunions, their hopes tinged with fear. "They'll welcome you," Eleanor said with conviction. "Your family? How could they not?" Dakota made a soft sound, not quite a laugh, but close. "You speak with confidence of things you cannot know." "Some things don't need seeing to be true," Eleanor replied, surprised by her own boldness. For the first time, she heard genuine amusement in Dakota's voice. Perhaps the white woman has wisdom after all. The moment of connection warmed Eleanor more than the midday sun. As they continued their journey westward, she found herself wondering about this man who had saved her life. What he had endured in that school, what dreams kept him moving toward a home he hadn't seen in 4 years, what he saw when he looked at her. That night they camped beneath a rock overhang, the small fire between them holding back the encroaching cold. As Eleanor drifted toward sleep, Dakota's voice came unexpectedly from the darkness. "The stars are bright tonight," he said, "like the eyes of ancestors watching over their children." Eleanor smiled, holding the image close as sleep claimed her. In the wilderness of the Dakota Territory, with danger all around and an uncertain future ahead, she had found something unexpected, a moment of peace, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. The next morning brought a change in the weather. Wind whipped across the open plain, carrying the promise of more snow. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter around her body as they set out, grateful for Dakota's steady presence beside her. "Storm comes," he observed. "We must reach the river crossing before nightfall." "Is it far?" Eleanor asked, already dreading. "Another day of exhausting travel, half-day's walk, longer with wind against us." Eleanor nodded grimly and tightened her grip on her walking stick. Each step was a battle against the strengthening gale, each breath a sharp reminder of winter's approach. Dakota remained close, occasionally grasping her elbow when stronger. Gusts threatened her balance. As they walked, Eleanor found herself focusing on the rhythm of Dakota's movement, the cadence of his steps, the subtle shifts in his breathing that signaled changes in terrain. There was a grace to his motion that reminded her of the deer that had once visited the edge of her family's farm in Kansas, alert and purposeful. "How do you move so quietly?" she asked during a brief respite when the wind calmed. "I listen to the land," Dakota replied. "It tells where to place each foot." "Could you teach me?" The question surprised them both. After a thoughtful pause, Dakota said, "Your stick. It is an extension of your arm, yes? I suppose so. Make it an extension of your ear instead." Eleanor frowned in confusion. "I don't understand." "The stick touches earth before your foot. Let it hear what lies ahead." Dakota placed his hand over hers on the walking stick. "Not just obstacles, textures, changes. The land speaks through wood to hand." Under his guidance, Eleanor began to use her walking stick differently, not simply as a probe for obstacles, but as a sensing tool for the terrain itself. She learned to distinguish the hollow sound of snow-covered depressions from the firm resistance of packed earth, the subtle vibration of rocky ground from the dampened response of moss-covered stone. By midday, Eleanor found herself moving with greater confidence, anticipating changes in the landscape before her foot made contact. When she successfully navigated a section of uneven ground without Dakota's assistance, a small sound of triumph escaped her. "You learn quickly," Dakota observed, approval evident in his voice. "I had a good teacher," Eleanor replied, a smile warming her face despite the biting wind. They continued westward, the wind growing stronger as the day progressed. Conversation became impossible, reduced to necessary warnings or directions shouted against the gale. By late afternoon, Eleanor's face was numb with cold, and her legs trembled with exhaustion. Just as she felt her strength failing, Dakota's hand gripped her arm firmly. "River ahead," he called. "Shelter beyond." The sound reached her then, the rush of water, somehow both frozen and flowing. The river wasn't entirely iced over, Dakota explained as they approached its banks. The current ran too swift in places, creating dangerous patches of thin ice amid more solid sections. "How do we cross?" Eleanor asked, fear evident in her voice. "Together," Dakota replied simply. "Your hand on my belt. Step only where I step." The crossing was treacherous. Ice creaked beneath their weight, water gurgled ominously nearby, and the wind seemed determined to topple them into the frigid current. Eleanor followed Dakota's instructions exactly, placing her feet precisely where his had been, maintaining a death grip on his belt with one hand while her walking stick tested the ice ahead with the other. Halfway across, disaster struck. Sudden gust caught Eleanor like a sail, throwing her off balance. Her foot slipped, crashing through a weak spot in the ice. Cold water rushed over her boot, soaking her leg to the knee. She cried out, more in shock than pain. Dakota reacted instantly. Strong arms encircled her waist, hauling her away from the broken ice. Without a word, he lifted Eleanor bodily and carried her the remaining distance across the river, setting her down only when they reached the opposite bank. "You should have left me," Eleanor gasped, shame burning her cheeks despite the cold. "I nearly killed us both." "Then we would have died together," Dakota replied matter-of-factly, "which is better than dying alone." The simple philosophy silenced Eleanor's self-recrimination. She nodded, accepting both his rescue and his wisdom with quiet gratitude. They found shelter in a small hollow beneath the twisted roots of an ancient cottonwood tree. The massive trunk blocked the worst of the wind, and the tangled roots formed a natural windbreak. Dakota quickly built a fire, then turned his attention to Eleanor's soaked boot and legging. "This must be removed," he said. No room for argument. In his tone, "Cold water kills quickly." Eleanor didn't protest. She allowed Dakota to remove her wet boot and stocking, wincing as the air struck her already numbing foot. Without comment, Dakota took her foot between his hands, rubbing vigorously to restore circulation. The pain was intense as feeling returned, but Eleanor bit her lip and endured it silently. When color had returned to her skin, Dakota wrapped her foot in a piece of soft hide from his pack. "Rest," he instructed. "I will dry your things." As the fire's warmth gradually penetrated her chilled body, Eleanor found herself studying Dakota. Through senses other than sight, the economical precision of his movements, the particular cadence of his breathing, the scent of pine and leather and wood smoke that seemed to accompany him. "You said you were at the school for 4 winters, she ventured eventually. "How old were you when they took you?" Dakota continued his work, arranging her boot near the fire to dry. 14 summers, he said finally. Old enough to remember what was stolen. Young enough to fear forgetting. "What was it like?" Eleanor asked softly. "If you don't mind, telling me." For a long moment she thought he might ignore the question entirely. Then he settled beside the fire, his voice taking on a distant quality. "They cut our hair first, said long hair was savage." His tone remained controlled, but Eleanor sensed the deep wound beneath his words. New clothes that scratched the skin, new names that twisted the tongue, punishment for speaking our language or practicing our ways. "That's monstrous," Eleanor whispered. "They believed they saved us," Dakota continued, "killed the Indian to save the man. These were their words. Some boys believed them, forgot their true names, forgot their families, became ghosts wearing white men's clothes. But not you. Not me." Pride colored his voice now. "Each night I spoke my true name, remembered my father's teachings, the stories of our people. I kept them like fire in winter, hidden but alive." Eleanor thought of the government officials who had visited her town in Kansas, speaking of progress and civilization and the education of the Indians. How different their narrative had been from the reality Dakota described. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the words were inadequate, "for what was done to you." "Your sorrow changes nothing," Dakota replied, but without bitterness. "The past is beyond reach. Only the path ahead matters now." They fell silent after that, each lost in private thoughts as the fire crackled between them and the wind sang through the cottonwood's branches. Before sleep claimed her, Eleanor realized something strange. In the 3 days since Dakota had found her, she had thought more about his past than her own uncertain future. There was something compelling about this man who had endured so much yet remained unbroken. As she drifted toward dreams, Eleanor wondered what awaited them in the days ahead and whether the paths that had crossed so unexpectedly might continue together beyond the journey to Prosperity Creek. Dawn brought clear skies and a brittle and cold that made the air itself seem crystalline. Eleanor's foot, though tender, could bear her weight again. After a quick breakfast of dried berries and more of the jerky, they resumed their journey westward. "We enter Pahasapa soon," Dakota said as they walked. "The Black Hills. What are they like?" Eleanor asked. She had heard settlers speak of the Black Hills in hushed tones, some with greed for the rumored gold that lay beneath the soil, others with fear of the Indian tribes who considered the mountains sacred. "They are the center," Dakota replied. "The heart from which all life flows, the place where earth meets sky." His voice had changed, taking on a reverence that Eleanor hadn't heard before. She sensed that they were entering a place of deep significance to him, not merely a geographical landmark, but a spiritual one. "My people say Wakantanka, the great mystery, gave these hills to us at the beginning of time," Dakota continued. "Each valley, each spring, each stone tells a story of our creation." "They sound beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "Beauty and power are the same in Pahasapa." A pause, then, "Your government wants the yellow metal beneath the soil. They send soldiers to take what is not theirs to take." Eleanor had no response to this truth. She had heard the rumors of treaty violations, of miners sneaking into Indian territory despite government promises to keep them out. William had spoken of it with their fellow travelers, how the discovery of gold had made the Black Hills irresistible to white men, regardless of what papers had been signed. "Is it safe for us to travel there?" she asked instead. "Safer than the open plain," Dakota replied. "The hills offer shelter from storms and eyes that might find us unwelcome." "You mean soldiers or other settlers?" "Both, and others." Dakota's voice darkened. "Men who hunt for bounty move through these lands. They kill my people and take proof to the forts for payment." Horror filled Eleanor at the implication. "Bounty hunters for scalps?" "Yes," the single word carried the weight of countless tragedies. "They do not ask questions before cutting. A dead Indian is payment, no matter the tribe or the person. And if they found you with me, they would kill me and tell you I had taken you captive." Dakota's tone was matter-of-fact. "Then they would return you to the nearest fort and claim reward for your rescue." Eleanor felt sick at the thought. The casual brutality of it, the way human life could be reduced to a transaction, was incomprehensible to her. Yet she knew Dakota spoke the truth. She had heard whispered stories among the settlers, boasts from men who had solved the Indian problem in territories they wished to claim. "I won't let that happen," she said firmly, though the promise felt hollow given her dependency on him. Dakota made a sound that might have been amusement. "You would fight these men? With what weapon?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted, "but I wouldn't let them hurt you without trying to stop them." Dakota fell silent, and Eleanor feared she had offended him with her presumption. Then, Unexpectedly, his hand found hers and squeezed briefly before releasing it. "Your heart is strong," he said simply, "but your eyes make you vulnerable. We will avoid those who hunt rather than challenge them." The terrain began to change as they walked, gradual at first, then more dramatically. The ground rose and fell in gentle swells that soon became steeper slopes. The snow-muffled silence of the plains gave way to new sounds. The creak and sway of pine trees, the occasional fall of snow from overburdened branches, the distant call of birds Eleanor couldn't identify. The air itself transformed, carrying the sharp resin scent of conifers and something else, a mineral quality that reminded Eleanor of the limestone caves she had visited as a child near the Mississippi. The wind, when it found them between sheltering stands of trees, carried a different song than the hollow moan of the open prairie. Dakota seemed to move with even greater confidence here, as though the landscape itself recognized and welcomed him. His step lightened, and occasionally Eleanor caught the sound of words in his native tongue, perhaps prayers or greetings to the sacred place they entered. By midday, the walking had become considerably more difficult. The paths twisted upward, sometimes doubling back on themselves as they navigated the increasingly vertical terrain. Eleanor's legs burned with exertion, and her breath came in sharp gasps that crystallized in the cold air. "We rest here," Dakota announced, guiding her to what felt like a fallen log. Eleanor sank onto it gratefully, stretching her aching limbs. As she caught her breath, she became aware of a new sound, a musical trickling nearby. "Water?" she asked. "Yes, a spring that never freezes. The breath of Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth, keeps it warm." Eleanor listened more carefully. The water seemed to sing as it moved, a delicate counterpoint to the deeper resonance of the forest around them. She found herself smiling at the beauty of it. "May I?" she asked, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the sound. "Come." Dakota helped her rise, guiding her carefully over uneven ground until the sound was directly before them. "Kneel here." Eleanor obeyed, reaching forward cautiously until her fingers met water, not ice-cold as she had expected, but pleasantly cool, with a silky quality unlike the hard-edged chill of the river they had crossed. "It's warm," she marveled. "Medicine water," Dakota explained. "It carries the earth's healing." Eleanor cupped her hands, bringing the water to her lips. It tasted clean and slightly mineral, with none of the muddy undertone that often plagued frontier wells. Something about it seemed to revitalize her, easing the ache in her muscles and clearing her head. "It's wonderful," she said, taking another drink. "The water remembers when the world was young," Dakota replied, "before men fought over land and gold. It carries that memory in each drop." They lingered at the spring longer than practical considerations might have dictated, both drawing strength from its quiet presence. When they finally continued their journey, Eleanor felt a reluctance to leave this peaceful place, as though they were departing from a sanctuary into a world that held less certainty. The afternoon brought new challenges. The path narrowed, becoming treacherous even for Dakota. Several times he had to lift Eleanor bodily over obstacles or guide her in painstaking detail through difficult passages. The forest grew denser, the trees occasionally so close together that they had to turn sideways to pass between them. By late afternoon, the temperature began to drop dramatically as the sun's feeble winter light faded behind the mountains. Eleanor's toes and fingers numbed despite her mittens and the extra wrappings Dakota had fashioned for her feet. Her ears burned with cold beneath her woolen scarf. Just as she was about to ask how much farther they must travel before making camp, Dakota stopped abruptly. His hand shot out, gripping Eleanor's arm so tightly it hurt. "What is it?" she whispered, sensing his sudden tension. "Smoke," he replied, voice barely audible, "not far ahead." Eleanor strained her senses but detected nothing unusual. "Is it your people?" No. The word carried absolute certainty. Wrong smell. Pine burns, but with something else. White man's tobacco, whiskey. A new fear gripped Eleanor. "The bounty hunters you mentioned?" "Perhaps. Or miners. Deserters. In from the fort." Dakota's voice was grim. "None friendly to Lakota or to woman traveling with Lakota." They stood frozen in indecision. To continue forward might lead them directly into danger. To retreat meant losing precious time and distance, forcing them to find another route through unfamiliar terrain as darkness approached. "What should we do?" Eleanor asked, trusting Dakota's judgment in this foreign territory. His silence lasted so long that Eleanor feared he might be considering leaving her, that his own survival might demand separation from the blind woman who slowed his progress and doubled his risk. "We go round," he said finally. "There is another path, harder, longer, but safer." Relief flooded through Eleanor, followed immediately by guilt for doubting him. "Lead the way," she said, gripping her walking stick with renewed determination. Dakota guided her off their current path, moving with extreme care to minimize noise. The new route seemed to climb more steeply, forcing Eleanor to use her hands as well as her feet to navigate the rocky terrain. Branches snagged her clothing and hair, and more than once she bit back a cry as her shin collided with an unseen obstacle. The effort of silent travel was exhausting. Every step required concentration. Every movement had to be calculated to avoid snapping twigs or dislodging stones. Eleanor's world narrowed to the immediate tasks of balance and quiet. Her senses stretched to their limits as she followed Dakota's lead. After what seemed like hours of grueling progress, the ground began to level somewhat. Dakota's pace slowed, and Eleanor sensed they had reached some kind of destination. His hand found her shoulder, guiding her to a seated position against what felt like a rock wall. "Cave," he whispered close to her ear. "Small but deep enough. We stay until dawn." The space was cramped, barely large enough for two people to sit with knees drawn up. Eleanor could feel the rough stone of the cave walls on either side of her shoulders, and the ceiling couldn't have been more than a foot above her head. The close quarters should have been uncomfortable, but after the punishing climb in the bitter cold, the relative shelter felt like luxury. "No fire," Dakota cautioned. "Too dangerous." Eleanor nodded, though the prospect of a night without warmth was daunting. As if reading her thoughts, Dakota shifted closer until their sides pressed together, sharing what little body heat they possessed. "Those men," Eleanor whispered, "how close are they?" "Not close enough to find us if we remain still and silent," Dakota replied, "but close enough that their ears might catch sound carried on night wind." They sat in silence as darkness fell completely. Without a fire, the temperature in the small cave dropped rapidly. Eleanor found herself shivering uncontrollably despite her layers of clothing and Dakota's proximity. "Here," he murmured, and she felt him unwrapping something, the buffalo hide he carried in his pack. He draped it over both of them, creating a shared cocoon that gradually began to trap their combined warmth. Under the hide, Dakota's arms slipped around Eleanor's shoulders, drawing her closer against his side. In any other circumstance, such intimacy with a man not her husband would have been unthinkable. But here, suspended between worlds, between life and death, conventional propriety seemed as distant as William and the children she might never see again. "Sleep if you can," Dakota advised. "I will keep watch." "Will you sleep at all?" Eleanor asked, concerned by the weariness she'd heard creeping into his voice as the day progressed. "Later, when the stars reach their highest point." Eleanor wanted to protest that he needed rest as much as she did, but she knew the futility of arguing. Instead, she allowed herself to lean more fully against him, offering what little comfort her presence might provide in return for his protection. As she drifted toward sleep, her mind turned to William. Would he be searching for her now, or had he already accepted her loss? Were the children crying for their mother, or had the demands of survival already forced them to move forward? The thought brought a sharp pang of grief, yet it felt somehow distant, as though it belonged to another life, another Eleanor. Here in this tiny cave, pressed against the steady warmth of Dakota's side, the immediacy of survival had transformed her. She was no longer merely William Montgomery's blind wife, defined by her limitations and dependencies. Here, she was simply Eleanor, a woman finding strength she hadn't known she possessed, learning to navigate a world more complex than the carefully constructed environment her family had built around her. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, as consciousness faded, she felt an unexpected sensation stealing through her weary body. Freedom. Eleanor woke to Dakota's hand on her shoulder, his touch feather-light but insistent. She had no idea how long she'd slept, but her body protested every movement, stiff from cold and the unyielding stone beneath her. "Listen," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. She held perfectly still, straining her senses into the darkness. At first she heard nothing beyond the soft sigh of wind through pine needles. Then it came, voices, distant but unmistakable. Men's voices, rough with drink, and something darker that made Eleanor's skin crawl, even at this distance. "They search wider than before," Dakota murmured, "moving this way. Can they find us?" Eleanor's question was barely audible, fear constricting her throat. "Not if we leave now, while their attention is elsewhere." His hand found hers beneath. "The buffalo hide. We must move quickly and without sound, like shadows across stone." Eleanor nodded, summoning her depleted reserves of strength. Her limbs felt leaden, her fingers and toes numb with cold, but the alternative to movement was unthinkable. She folded the buffalo hide with trembling hands while Dakota gathered their few possessions. "Ready?" he asked, his voice so low she felt rather than heard it. "Yes." Dakota guided her from the cave, his movements so deliberate that Eleanor found herself unconsciously matching his careful rhythm. The night air struck her face like a physical blow, carrying a deeper chill than before. Snow had fallen while they sheltered, adding a fresh layer of difficulty to their escape. They moved parallel to the men's voices, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection while following the same general path deeper into the Black Hills. Eleanor's walking stick became both lifeline and liability, essential for navigating the treacherous terrain, yet each contact with stone or frozen earth risked creating sound that might carry through the crystalline night air. Hours passed in this tense, silent progress. The voices eventually faded behind them, but Dakota maintained their careful pace until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Only then did his grip on Eleanor's arm relax slightly. "They turned back," he said, his voice still hushed, but no longer a whisper. "For now." "Who were they?" Eleanor asked, finally daring to speak normally. "Deserters from Fort Laramie, army uniforms, but no discipline." Disgust colored Dakota's voice. "They drink, hunt Indians for bounty, rob travelers who cannot defend themselves." "How do you know?" "I watched them while you slept. Their fire burned high, the way of men who fear darkness more than those who might see their flames." The casual revelation that Dakota had left their hiding place to scout their pursuers startled Eleanor. She had never sensed his departure or return, a reminder of how silently he could move when necessary. "Are we safe now?" Safer, Dakota qualified, but we must continue to avoid the common paths. This adds days to our journey. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. I'm slowing you down. Yes, the blunt admission stung despite its truth. But this is the way I have chosen. They walked in silence as the sun rose higher, its feeble winter. Light offering little warmth, but improving visibility, for Dakota at least. The fresh snow made footing treacherous, but it also muffled their passage, allowing them to move more quickly than before. By midday, hunger gnawed at Eleanor's belly, a sharp reminder that they had eaten nothing since the previous afternoon. Her water skin was nearly empty, and thirst made her tongue feel swollen in her mouth. Just as she was working up the courage to mention these needs, Dakota stopped. "We rest here," he announced. "There is shelter and water." Eleanor heard it then, the musical gurgle of another spring, this one larger than the one they'd encountered earlier. Dakota guided her to a sheltered hollow beneath a rock outcropping, where the wind couldn't reach them. "Stay," he instructed, "I will find food." Before Eleanor could respond, he was gone, his footsteps receding into silence. She sat alone, straining her ears for any sound of the deserters, but heard only the gentle voice of the spring and the occasional whisper of snow falling from pine branches. The solitude gave her time to take stock of her situation. 5 days had passed since the storm had separated her from the wagon train. 5 days of walking through wilderness she couldn't see, guided by a man whose face she would never know. Her body ached from exertion, and her heart ached with worry for her family, yet beneath these pains ran a current of something unexpected, a fierce determination to survive, to continue, to overcome. Dakota returned less than an hour later, his approach heralded by the soft crunch of snow beneath his moccasins. Eleanor turned toward the sound, relief flooding through her at his return. "Rabbit," he announced, setting something down beside her. "And pine nuts. The land provides even in winter." He built a small, smokeless fire using dry wood and a technique that contained both flame and smoke within a ring of stones. The scent of roasting meat soon filled their shelter, making Eleanor's mouth water in anticipation. "Your hunting skills are impressive," she observed, "to catch a rabbit in winter in this terrain." "The rabbit was careless," Dakota replied, but she heard a hint of pride in his voice, more concerned with finding food than watching for predators. "Like us," Eleanor mused, "focused on our own survival, perhaps blind to other dangers." "No," Dakota handed her a portion of the cooked meat. "Unlike the rabbit, we watch and listen. We adapt. This is why we live while others perish." The rabbit was tough but flavorful, and Eleanor ate with gusto, savoring each bite. The pine nuts added a resinous sweetness that complemented the gamey meat. After refilling their water skins from the spring, they rested longer than usual, allowing their bodies to recover from the night's exertions. As they sat in companionable silence, Eleanor's thoughts turned again to William and the children. Were they in Prosperity Creek by now? Had they found shelter for the winter? Did they believe her dead, or still hold hope for her return? "Tell me of your family," Dakota said suddenly, as though reading her thoughts. Surprised by his interest, Eleanor hesitated before responding. "William is a carpenter by trade, strong, practical. We've been married 10 years. She smiled fondly. "He's a man of few words, but deep feeling. Emma is 8, our firstborn. She's thoughtful, always asking questions about how things work. Thomas is 6, all energy and mischief." "They are good children?" "The best," Eleanor said softly. "Emma helps me with cooking and mending. She describes things to me, colors, clouds, the expressions on people's faces. Thomas brings me interesting things to touch, oddly shaped rocks, feathers, flowers. They've never treated my blindness as a burden." "And your husband? Does he see you clearly?" The question caught Eleanor off guard with its perceptiveness. William tries. He worries, wants to protect me. Sometimes he forgets I'm capable of more than he believes. She sighed. He means well. Many see blindness as weakness, Dakota observed. They do not understand it is simply another way of knowing the world. Eleanor turned toward him, touched by this perspective. Is that how you see it? My grandfather's sight dimmed with age, but his wisdom grew. He taught me to close my eyes when tracking, to hear what others miss, to feel wind's message on skin. Dakota's voice softened with remembrance. He said true blindness is refusing to use all senses given by Wakantanka. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man, Eleanor said, unexpectedly moved. He was. The simple past tense carried a weight of loss. Soldiers killed him when they burned our village 3 summers past. He refused to leave his sacred items behind. Eleanor's hand reached instinctively for Dakota's arm, finding it with unerring accuracy. I'm sorry. He didn't acknowledge her touch directly, but neither did he pull away. They sat in silence as the fire burned low, each lost in private memories of those absent but not forgotten. When they resumed their journey that afternoon, something had shifted between them, a deepening of understanding, perhaps, or a recognition of shared vulnerability beneath their very different strengths. Eleanor found herself matching Dakota's pace more naturally, anticipating changes in terrain before he needed to warn her, sensing his movements with increasing precision. The landscape continued to transform around them, the terrain becoming more varied and challenging. Dakota described massive rock formations that thrust upward from the earth like the spines of ancient beasts, narrow valleys that wound between, sheer cliffs, forests of pines so dense that even midday felt like twilight beneath their branches. It's beautiful, isn't it? Eleanor asked, as they paused to catch their breath after a particularly steep climb. Yes, Dakota replied, and for once he elaborated without prompting. The hills shine black-green in winter sun. Snow catches on pine needles like small stars. Wind moves through stone valleys like breath through a flute, singing the songs of creation. His poetic description painted such a vivid picture that Eleanor felt she could almost see the landscape through his eyes. Thank you, she said softly, for helping me see. Dakota made a non-committal sound, but Eleanor sensed his pleasure at her appreciation. As they continued walking, he began to name features of the landscape in his native language, teaching her Lakota words for hill, valley, river, and sky. Eleanor repeated each word carefully, fascinated by the flowing rhythm so different from English. Mni, she said, the word for water feeling strange but pleasing on her tongue. Sir, good, Dakota approved. You speak with respect. Many white people twist our words like breaking branches. Languages are doorways into how people understand. The world, Eleanor replied. My father taught languages at a school in St. Louis before we moved to Kansas. He always said that to speak another tongue is to glimpse another way of seeing. Your father was wise for a white man, Dakota observed, and Eleanor chose to take it as a compliment. They made camp that night in a small clearing surrounded by pines. The trees broke the wind's force, and Dakota deemed it safe enough to build a proper fire. The warmth was glorious after days of minimal comfort, and Eleanor stretched her hands toward the flames, relishing the sensation of feeling returning to her fingertips. Tomorrow, we reach a place my people call Wakpa Olowanji, Singing River, Dakota said as they shared dried meat and the last of the pine nuts. Beyond that, 3 more days to where the mining town should be. Eleanor's heart leapt at this news. So close. If weather holds, if no more soldiers or deserters find our trail, Dakota's voice remained pragmatic. Many things can still prevent our arrival. You've brought me this far, Eleanor said, confidence rising within her. "We'll make it the rest of the way." Dakota didn't reply immediately. When he did, his voice carried an unfamiliar hesitation. "When you find your family, what then?" The question caught Eleanor unprepared. She had been so focused on survival, on the journey itself, that she had given little thought to what would happen after reuniting with William and the children. "We'll continue to Prosperity Creek, I suppose," she said slowly. "William has a cousin there who offered him work in the carpentry shop. We'll build a home, settle in for the winter at least. And then—" Eleanor frowned, sensing a deeper question beneath Dakota's words. "What do you mean?" "You have changed on this journey," he said simply. "The woman who returns is not the woman who fell from the wagon." The observation struck Eleanor with the force of revelation. He was right, of course. The dependence, the careful boundaries of her former life, the shelter of routine and familiarity, all had been stripped away by necessity. In their place had grown something new: confidence, resilience, a deeper awareness of her own capabilities. "I hadn't thought of it that way," she admitted. "But you're right. I've changed." She paused, considering. "And William may not understand that change." "He will see what he expects to see," Dakota suggested, "unless you show him otherwise." The conversation turned Eleanor's thoughts in new directions. How would William receive this altered version of his wife? Would he welcome her newfound independence or feel threatened by it? Would he listen if she spoke of what she had learned from a Lakota guide, or dismiss the experience in his relief at having her back? These questions followed Eleanor into sleep, weaving through her dreams like dark threads through a familiar tapestry. She woke before dawn, Dakota's hand once again on her shoulder. "We must move," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "I smell smoke, too much smoke." Eleanor sat up quickly, instantly alert. The deserters, no, forest fire. Dakota was already gathering their few possessions. "Wind brings it from the south. We go north and east toward the river." Fear gripped Eleanor as she scrambled to her feet. She had heard stories of prairie fires that moved faster than a galloping horse, consuming everything in their path. A forest fire in these dense pines could be equally devastating, and they were deep in the wilderness with no clear escape route. They moved as quickly as safety allowed, Dakota setting a punishing pace that tested Eleanor's endurance. The smell of smoke grew stronger with each passing hour, and a strange quality entered the air, a heaviness that made breathing increasingly difficult. "How far to the river?" Eleanor gasped as they paused briefly to drink from their water. "Skins." "Too far if we maintain this path," Dakota admitted. "The fire moves faster than expected. We must find another way." The tension in his voice frightened Eleanor more than his words. If Dakota was concerned, their situation must be truly dire. She gripped her walking stick tighter, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "I can go faster," she insisted. "Just lead the way." Dakota squeezed her shoulder briefly, acknowledgement perhaps, or encouragement, before resuming their flight. The terrain grew steeper, forcing them to climb rather than simply walk. Eleanor's hands became as important as her feet, grasping roots and rock outcroppings to pull herself upward as Dakota guided her from above. The smoke thickened around them, making Eleanor's eyes water and her throat burn. She coughed repeatedly, each spasm sending pain through her chest. Dakota tore a strip from his shirt, soaked it with water from his skin, and tied it over her nose and mouth. The damp cloth helped somewhat, filtering the worst of the smoke, but breathing remained laborious. By midday, the distant roar of the fire was audible, a sound like continuous thunder rolling through the forest. The air temperature had risen noticeably, hot wind gusting against their backs as they climbed ever higher. "There," Dakota said suddenly, relief evident in his voice. "Stone bluff above. Fire cannot climb sheer rock. We go up." The ascent was the most challenging physical feat Eleanor had ever attempted. The rock face was nearly vertical in places, offering minimal handholds. Dakota climbed just above her, directing her movements, sometimes reaching down to guide her hand to an invisible crevice or stable protrusion. Each upward movement required absolute concentration, each placement of hand or foot a decision between progress and potential disaster. Eleanor's world narrowed to the immediate demands of the climb. Her palms bled from contact with rough stone, her muscles screamed in protest, and sweat poured from her body despite the winter air. Yet somehow, she kept moving, driven by the primal need to escape the approaching inferno. After what seemed like hours of torturous ascent, Dakota's hands gripped her forearms, hauling her over the edge onto level ground. Eleanor collapsed, gasping for breath, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. The stone beneath her cheek felt blessedly cool compared to the heat rising from below. "Rest," Dakota instructed, his own breathing labored. "We are safe for now." Eleanor lay motionless, allowing her racing heart to slow gradually. When she finally found the strength to sit up, Dakota handed her the water skin. She drank deeply, the liquid soothing her smoke-ravaged throat. "The fire?" she asked, turning her face toward the sound of distant roaring. "It burns below," Dakota replied, "following the valley we left. The wind pushes it eastward, away from us now." Relief flooded through Eleanor. "So we're truly safe." "From fire, yes." Dakota settled beside her on the stone outcropping. "But we have climbed far from our path, and our water runs low." The implications were clear. They had escaped immediate danger only to face new challenges. Their carefully planned route was now impossible to follow, and they had limited supplies for an altered journey. "What do we do?" Eleanor asked, trusting Dakota's knowledge of this wilderness far more than her own judgment. "We stay here until morning," he decided, "then follow the ridgeline north until we find a path down to the river. It will add another day to our journey, perhaps two." Eleanor nodded, accepting this change without complaint. What choice did they have? The fire had forced their hand, as had the deserters before it. Survival meant adaptation, a lesson she was learning more thoroughly with each passing day. As evening approached, the glow of the fire became visible even to Eleanor's blind eyes. A faint, reddish haze against her usual darkness. Dakota described the scene below. Entire sections of forest engulfed in flames, trees becoming torches against the darkening sky, wildlife fleeing before the advancing wall of fire. "It is terrible," he said quietly, "but necessary. Fire cleanses. New growth will come in spring." "It's hard to imagine renewal when faced with such destruction," Eleanor observed. "This is the way of all things," Dakota replied. "What appears as ending often creates beginning. Like your fall from the wagon, terrible at the moment yet leading to new path." His philosophical perspective gave Eleanor pause. Would she eventually view her separation from William and the children as something other than tragedy? Could this enforced journey have purpose beyond mere survival? They shared the last of their food that night, a meager meal of dried meat that did little to satisfy their hunger. The stone plateau offered no materials for a fire, forcing them to huddle together beneath the buffalo hide for warmth as temperatures dropped precipitously after sunset. Eleanor's dreams were troubled. Visions of flames pursuing her through endless forests, of William and the children always just beyond reach, of rivers that dried up as she approached them. She woke repeatedly, each time finding Dakota awake beside her, his vigilance unbroken despite his own exhaustion. Dawn brought the smell of ash and a sky Dakota described as wounded, grey with smoke that obscured the sun. The fire had passed. through the valley below them, leaving a blackened landscape where vibrant forest had stood just yesterday. The devastation was complete, yet somehow not as absolute as Eleanor had feared. Dakota pointed out areas already revealing the forest floor, cleared of undergrowth, but with larger trees still standing, scarred but alive. They followed the ridgeline northward as planned, moving carefully along the elevated stone path. The terrain was treacherous, narrow in places, with sheer drops on either side. Eleanor's walking stick became essential, testing each section of ground before she committed her weight to it. By mid-morning, thirst had become their primary concern. Their water skins were empty, and the smoke-laden air exacerbated their dehydration. Eleanor's lips cracked painfully, and her tongue felt swollen in her mouth. She didn't complain, but Dakota sensed her distress. "Listen," he said suddenly, stopping in mid-stride. "Water." Eleanor strained her ears, filtering out the sound of wind and their own breathing. There, faint but unmistakable, the musical gurgle of water against stone. Not a river, perhaps, but some kind of stream or spring. "Where?" she asked, her parched voice barely audible. Below, the sound echoes up. Dakota's hand found her shoulder. "We must climb down. Can you continue?" Eleanor nodded, determined not to be the limiting factor in their survival. The descent proved even more challenging than the previous days. Ascent. The rock face was less stable, with loose stones that shifted treacherously beneath their weight. Several times, small avalanches of debris cascaded down the slope, forcing them to pause and reassess their route. Dakota remained just below Eleanor, guiding her movements and bracing her when necessary. Despite their precarious position, she found herself marveling at his patience. Never once had he expressed frustration at her limitations or the extra care her blindness required. His accommodation of her needs seemed as natural as breathing, incorporated into his movements without apparent thought or effort. When they finally reached the source of the water sound, a small spring emerging from between rocks midway down the slope, Eleanor nearly wept with relief. They drank deeply, replenishing their bodies and refilling their water skins. The spring yielded sweet, cold water, untainted by smoke or ash, a small miracle in the devastated landscape. "We follow the water," Dakota decided after they had rested. "Spring becomes stream. Stream leads to river." The path of the emerging stream created a natural route down the remaining slope, though not an easy one. The water had carved a steep channel through rock and soil, forming a series of small cascades that they had to navigate carefully. But compared to their earlier descent, this route felt almost manageable. By late afternoon, they had reached the valley floor, where the stream widened enough to be considered a proper creek. The surrounding landscape was a patchwork of destruction, areas completely blackened by fire, interspersed with pockets that had somehow escaped the worst of the burning. "Fire is strange," Dakota observed as they picked their way through the altered terrain. "It takes what it wishes, leaves what it does not. No pattern a man can fully understand." They found shelter that night in a hollow beneath the tangled roots of a fallen pine, a giant that had somehow escaped burning despite the scorched earth around it. Dakota fashioned a small fire from unburnt branches, and they huddled close to its warmth, grateful for the comfort after a day of grueling travel. As the sky darkened to deep indigo above them, Eleanor found herself thinking again of the mining settlement that was their destination. It seemed simultaneously closer and further away than before, closer in actual distance perhaps, but separated from them by new obstacles and challenges born of their diverted route. "Dakota," she began hesitantly, "when we reach Prosperity Creek, what will you do? Continue to your people's winter camp?" The question had been building within her for days, though she had avoided asking it directly. Now, With their journey potentially nearing its end, she found herself needing to know his plans. Dakota was silent for so long that Eleanor wondered if he would answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "My people's winter camp may no longer exist," he said quietly. "4 winters have passed since I was taken. Many changes come in such time. Villages move, bands separate. Some join reservations out of hunger or force." "You don't know where to find them," Eleanor realized. "I know where they should be," Dakota clarified, "near Matopaha, Bear Butte, but whether they remain..." He let the sentence hang unfinished. The admission of uncertainty touched Eleanor deeply. Dakota, who had seemed so confident and capable, throughout their journey, carried his own fear of abandonment, his own question of belonging. "What if they're not there?" she asked gently. "Then I follow sign until I find them," he replied with simple determination, "or until I know they are gone forever." "And if they're gone?" Dakota's silence spoke volumes. This possibility, that his people had been killed or forcibly relocated during his absence, was one he had clearly contemplated but was reluctant to voice. "Then I become ghost," he said finally, "walking between worlds, belonging to none." The desolation in his voice moved Eleanor to reach for his hand in the darkness. She found it easily, as though some sense beyond sight guided her. His fingers were calloused and strong, yet they returned her gentle pressure with surprising tenderness. "You could come with us," she offered impulsively, "to Prosperity Creek, just until spring, when travel is easier." The moment the words left her mouth, Eleanor recognized their impossibility. A Lakota man in a mining settlement would face hostility at best, violence at worst. William would never understand her connection to Dakota, never accept his presence in their lives. The children might, but they weren't the ones who made such decisions. Dakota seemed to recognize these realities as clearly as she did. "Our paths join for a time," he said gently, "then separate as all paths must." Eleanor nodded, unexpected grief tightening her throat. "I know," she whispered. "I just wish." She trailed off, unable to articulate exactly what she wished. For simpler circumstances? For a world where the boundaries between their peoples weren't drawn in blood and broken promises? For more time with this man who had shown her aspects of herself she hadn't known existed? "Sleep now," Dakota said, his thumb brushing once across her knuckles before he released her hand. "Tomorrow brings new challenges. We need strength." Eleanor obeyed, curling beneath the buffalo hide as Dakota added wood to their small fire. As consciousness faded, she found herself wondering what awaited them in the days ahead, and whether the inevitable parting of their ways would be as final as Dakota seemed to believe. Dawn brought a sky cleared somewhat of smoke, though the acrid scent of burnt wood still permeated the air. Eleanor woke to the sound of Dakota moving quietly around their small camp, preparing for the day ahead. Her body ached from the previous day's exertions, muscles protesting even the simplest movements as she sat up. "The creek has joined a larger stream," Dakota announced, handing her a strip of dried meat, the last of their provisions. "We follow it north and west. 2 days to the mining settlement if terrain allows." 2 days? The words sent a conflicting surge of emotions through Eleanor. Hope at the prospect of reuniting with her family, coupled with an unexpected reluctance to see this journey end. She chewed the tough meat slowly, savoring both its sustenance and the momentary distraction from her complicated thoughts. They set out as the first birds began their morning songs, survivors of the fire returning to claim what remained of their territory. The air felt cooler than previous days, carrying a sharpness that hinted at approaching snow. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter around her body, grateful for its protection against the wind that funneled through the narrow valley. The stream they followed had carved a relatively level path through the hills, making their travel easier than it had been in days. Still, obstacles remained. Fallen trees, rock slides, and stretches where the water had undercut the bank, forcing them to climb higher to find passage. Dakota maintained their pace with unwavering determination, stopping only when Eleanor's fatigue became obvious. By midday, the stream had widened considerably, its voice deepening to a steady rumble as it gathered strength from numerous tributaries. The wind carried the damp mineral scent of larger water ahead, the Wakpa Olowanji that Dakota had mentioned previously. "Singing river soon," he confirmed when Eleanor commented on the changing sound. "Strong current, wide banks, dangerous to cross." "Can we go around it?" Eleanor asked, concern evident in her voice. "No, river runs through deep canyon here. We must cross." Eleanor nodded, trusting Dakota's knowledge despite her apprehension. They continued forward, following the tributary stream until its path suddenly opened onto a broader space. The sound that greeted them was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced, a melodious roaring that seemed to contain countless overlapping tones. "The river sings," she marveled, turning her face toward the complex symphony. "Yes." For once, Dakota's voice held something approaching reverence. "Waters move through rock channels, creating music. My people say spirits play flutes beneath the surface, calling to those who know how to listen." Eleanor closed her eyes, a habitual gesture that focused her hearing more acutely. The river's song was mesmerizing in its complexity, deep thrumming bass notes, fluid middle tones that rippled and swelled, and higher pitches that danced above the fundamental flow. She found herself smiling in simple appreciation of this natural wonder. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Many places in Pahasapa hold such beauty," Dakota replied. "This is why my people fight to keep these lands. Not for gold or ownership, but for the sacred voices that speak here." His words carried a weight of loss, for land already taken, for battles already lost, for a way of life increasingly threatened by the very civilization Eleanor represented. She felt the uncomfortable tension of her position. Beneficiary of one people's expansion, witness to another's displacement. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the inadequacy of the words even as she spoke them. "You did not create this war," Dakota replied, neither accepting nor rejecting her apology. "But you live in its shadow, as do I." They stood, listening to the river's music for several minutes longer, united in the appreciation of its beauty, if divided by the politics of its possession. Then reluctantly, they turned their attention to the practical challenge it presented. The singing river was indeed formidable, wide, swift, and bordered by steep banks that offered limited access to its waters. Dakota scouted upstream for nearly an hour before finding a crossing point he deemed manageable. The river narrowed somewhat there, funneling between rock formations that created a natural ford. "Still dangerous," he cautioned as they prepared to cross. "Water is deep and cold, current strong. We cross together, connected." From his pack, Dakota produced a length of rawhide cord. He tied one end securely around his waist, the other around Eleanor's, leaving about 3 feet of slack between them. The arrangement would prevent them from being separated by the current while still allowing each to move independently. "Follow exactly behind me," Dakota instructed. "Step only where I step. If you fall, I will hold you until you regain footing. If I fall, brace yourself and stand firm." Eleanor nodded, mouth dry with apprehension. The river's beautiful song now seemed tinged with menace, a siren call promising cold oblivion beneath its surface. She gripped her walking stick firmly, knowing it would serve as both probe and support in the treacherous crossing. They entered the water together, Eleanor gasping as the icy current swirled around her ankles, then her calves, then her knees. Dakota moved deliberately, testing each step before committing his weight, occasionally pausing to ensure Eleanor maintained her balance. The riverbed was uneven, scattered with smooth stones that shifted treacherously underfoot. Halfway across, the water deepened suddenly, rising to Eleanor's waist. The current's pressure increased dramatically, pushing against her body with frightening force. Her walking stick found no purchase in the deeper water, leaving her dependent on Dakota's guidance and her own increasingly uncertain balance. "3 more steps to shallower water," Dakota called above the river's roar. "Move slowly, follow my lead." Eleanor took a careful step forward, then another. Just as Dakota had promised, the riverbed began to rise, the water's pressure easing. Incrementally, relief flooded through her as her walking stick once again found solid purchase on the streambed. Then disaster struck with shocking suddenness. A large object, perhaps a log dislodged by the fire, crashed into Eleanor's side, sweeping her feet from beneath her. She plunged beneath the surface, the world transforming instantly into cold, roaring darkness. Water filled her nose and mouth as she flailed desperately, disoriented and panicking. The rawhide cord around her waist went taut, halting her downriver drift. Strong hands gripped her coat, pulling her upward until her face broke the surface. She gasped for air, coughing violently as Dakota dragged her toward the shore. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "Keep moving. The cold will take you quickly if you stop." Eleanor tried to help, to gain her footing, but her waterlogged clothes weighed her down, and the shock of immersion had robbed her limbs of coordination. Dakota half-carried, half-dragged her the remaining distance to the bank, not stopping until they were well clear of the water's edge. My stick!" Eleanor gasped through chattering teeth, suddenly realizing her walking stick was gone, lost to the river's current. "Later," Dakota said firmly. "Now we must get you warm and dry." He worked with swift efficiency, untying the rawhide cord and stripping away Eleanor's sodden outer garments, despite her instinctive protests. The buffalo hide appeared around her shoulders, its fur blessedly dry and warm against her shivering body. Dakota removed her boots next, wringing water from her stockings before rubbing her feet vigorously to restore circulation. "We need fire," he said, his own voice now carrying a slight tremor from the cold. "Stay here. I will gather wood." Eleanor huddled beneath the buffalo hide, her body shaking uncontrollably as Dakota moved away. She had experienced cold before. The bitter Kansas winters had taught her its bite, but nothing like this bone-deep chill that seemed to radiate from her very core. Each breath was an effort, each heartbeat a labored thump in her chest. Time lost meaning as she drifted between awareness and a dangerous lethargy. Distantly, she heard Dakota return. Then the familiar sounds of fire making, stone striking stone, the soft whoosh of tinder catching flame, the crackle of larger pieces catching. Heat gradually bloomed nearby, growing stronger as Dakota built, the fire to a proper blaze. "Come closer," he urged, guiding her nearer to the flames. He had created a windbreak of sorts, arranging rocks to reflect the fire's heat back toward them. Eleanor moved gratefully into this pocket of warmth, extending her hands toward the fire. "My walking stick," she said again, the loss suddenly overwhelming in its implications. "William made it. It was." "I know," Dakota replied, his voice gentler than usual, "but a stick can be replaced. Your life cannot." He was right, of course, but the loss felt symbolic, as though the last physical connection to her former life had been severed. William had carved that stick with patient care, sanding it smooth over many evenings, adding subtle notches near the handle that her fingers could read like a signature. Now it was gone, claimed by the singing river like so many other aspects of her previous existence. Dakota moved around the fire, hanging her wet clothes on branches to dry. His own garments were partially soaked as well, but he tended to Eleanor's needs before his own with characteristic stoicism. "You saved my life," Eleanor said when she finally regained enough warmth to speak normally. "Again. And you maintained grip on the cord when many would have panicked completely," Dakota countered. "You are stronger than you know." They remained by the fire through the afternoon, allowing their clothes to dry and their bodies to recover from the river crossing. Dakota fashioned a new walking stick for Eleanor from a straight branch of pine, carefully stripping away the bark and smoothing the knots with his knife. It wasn't the polished, perfectly balanced tool that William had created, but it would serve its purpose. "Thank you," Eleanor said when he placed it in her hands. Her fingers explored its length, learning its unique shape and weight. This stick carried different memories, not of William's patient craftsmanship, but of Dakota's practical kindness in a moment of need. Evening approached with another shift in the weather. The wind changed direction, bringing colder air from the north and the unmistakable scent of approaching snow. Dakota built up the fire and constructed a simple lean-to of branches to provide additional shelter. They would need to remain here for the night, regaining strength before the final leg of their journey. As darkness fell, Dakota shared the last of their provisions, a handful of dried berries he had been saving for an emergency. The meager food did little to satisfy Eleanor's hunger, but the gesture itself provided a different kind of nourishment. Throughout their journey, Dakota had consistently put her needs before his own, sharing resources that he might have preserved for his solitary journey to his people's winter camp. "Tomorrow we reach higher ground," he said as they huddled near the fire, the promised snow beginning to fall in lazy spirals around their shelter. "From there, we should see smoke from the mining town's chimneys. One more day of travel beyond that." One more day. The journey that had seemed endless when it began was now approaching its conclusion. Eleanor felt a curious reluctance at the prospect, a sensation so unexpected that she hardly knew how to interpret it. Shouldn't she be eager for reunion with her family, grateful that the hardships of wilderness travel would soon end? "What will you tell your husband?" Dakota asked, as though reading her thoughts. "About your journey?" The question caught Eleanor unprepared. What would she tell William? How could she possibly convey the transformation these days had wrought? The physical challenges she had overcome, the skills she had developed, the strength she had discovered within herself. These were tangible changes, but deeper shifts had occurred as well, altering her perception of herself and her place in the world. "The truth," she said finally, "that I was saved by a Lakota man who treated me with kindness and respect. That I learned more about survival in these days than in all my previous years combined. That I am not the same woman who fell from the wagon." And if he does not wish to hear this truth, Eleanor sighed, recognizing the likely reality of William's response. He would focus on her rescue, her safety, her return to the protective circle of family. The details of her journey, particularly her growing respect for and connection to Dakota, would be unwelcome complications in what should be a simple narrative of loss and recovery. "Then I will keep these truths for myself," she replied. But I will not forget them. Or you." Dakota was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an uncharacteristic hesitation. "Among my people, a journey such as this creates a bond. Those who face death together and survive become kin of a kind, not by blood, but by shared courage." He paused, then added, "I would call you sister if your customs allowed such recognition between our peoples." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. The simple dignity of the offer, acknowledging their connection while respecting the boundaries their different worlds imposed, moved her deeply. "In my heart, I would be honored to be called your sister," she replied softly. whatever customs or prejudices might say. They sat in companionable silence as the snow continued to fall, creating a soft blanket around their shelter. The crackling fire and gentle breath of wind formed a natural lullaby, easing Eleanor towards sleep despite the discomfort of their situation. As consciousness faded, she found herself storing away the sensations of this moment. The warmth of the fire, the scent of pine, the quiet presence of the man who had become so important to her survival and self-discovery. Tomorrow would bring them closer to civilization, closer to the inevitable parting of their ways. But tonight, suspended between worlds, they shared a connection that transcended the arbitrary boundaries humans had drawn across the land. Morning revealed a transformed landscape, the fresh snow having covered the fire-scarred earth with a pristine white blanket that sparkled in the early sunlight. Eleanor sensed the change immediately upon waking, feeling the particular quality of light and sound that accompanies a snow-covered world. "Beautiful," Dakota said simply as they emerged from their shelter. "The snow heals what fire wounded." They ate a breakfast of roasted pine nuts that Dakota had gathered at dawn, the meager meal barely taking the edge off their hunger. Their provisions were exhausted, making today's progress toward the mining settlement even more crucial. Eleanor hoped William had reached Prosperity Creek safely with the children, establishing some kind of shelter before winter fully arrived. The new walking stick served its purpose well as they set out, though Eleanor found herself missing the familiar balance of William's craftsmanship. She adapted quickly, however, learning the new tool's quirks and limitations as they navigated the snow-covered terrain. Dakota maintained a steady pace despite their weakened condition, pushing them upward toward the ridge he had mentioned the previous night. The climb was arduous, made more challenging by the snow that concealed obstacles and created treacherous footing on steeper sections. Several times, Eleanor nearly fell, saved only by Dakota's quick reactions and her own improving reflexes. By midday, they had reached the summit of the ridge. Dakota scanned the horizon, his keen eyes searching for signs of human habitation in the valleys beyond. "There," he said finally, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Smoke rises from many chimneys, buildings clustered in valley where two creeks meet, your people's settlement." Eleanor turned her face in the direction he indicated, letting the faint breeze bring her what information it could. She detected nothing unusual. No distant sounds of activity or sense of civilization, but she trusted Dakota's assessment completely. "How far?" she asked, hope and apprehension mingling in her chest. "Half-day's walk if we maintain good pace. We will reach it before nightfall." They began their descent from the ridge, picking their way carefully down the snow-covered slope. The knowledge that their destination was finally within reach seemed to lend both of them renewed energy, despite their hunger and fatigue. As they drew closer to the settlement, Dakota grew increasingly vigilant, pausing frequently to scout their surroundings. When Eleanor questioned this caution, his response was pragmatic. "Mining settlements bring rough men. Many have fought, Indians or lost family, to raids. They shoot first, ask questions after." He adjusted his path slightly, keeping to areas with better cover. "I will bring you close enough to see clear path to town, then our journeys separate." The reality of their impending parting, mentioned frequently but never fully confronted, now loomed immediate and unavoidable. Eleanor felt a constriction in her chest that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "I hate that it has to be this way," she said quietly. "That you can't simply walk with me into town, be thanked properly for saving my life. This is the world as it exists, not as we might wish it to be." Dakota's voice held no self-pity, merely acceptance of a reality he had navigated his entire life. "Perhaps your children's children will know a different way, perhaps not." They continued in silence after that exchange, each absorbed in private thoughts as they drew ever closer to civilization. By mid-afternoon, the sounds of the settlement became audible even to Eleanor. Distant hammering, the occasional shout, the creaking of wagon wheels. Humanity's particular cacophony after days of nature's more subtle symphony. Dakota slowed their pace, moving with increased caution as they approached the outer boundaries of the cleared area surrounding Prosperity Creek. About half a mile from the settlement's edge, he guided Eleanor to a sheltered hollow formed by several large boulders. "This is where we part," he said simply. "The path ahead is clear, no obstacles between here and first buildings. Follow Sound of Creek on your right side. When you reach Wood Plank Walkway, you have entered town." Eleanor nodded, clutching her walking stick tightly as the moment of separation arrived. So many words crowded her mind, expressions of gratitude, acknowledgements of all she had learned, questions about his future that she had no right to ask. In the end, simplicity seemed the only appropriate response. "Thank you, Dakota," she said, reaching for his hand. "For my life, for everything you've taught me." His fingers wrapped around hers briefly, the contact communicating more than words could express. "You have strong spirit, Eleanor Montgomery. Remember this when others would make you small again." She nodded, throat too tight for speech. When Dakota gently disengaged his hand, the loss of contact felt momentous. The severing of a connection formed through shared hardship and mutual respect. "Wait," she said suddenly, reaching for the small leather pouch she wore around her neck, a gift from her father that contained a smooth river stone he had called her touchstone for difficult times. She removed the simple necklace and pressed it into Dakota's hand. "Take this, a remembrance." Dakota accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity, understanding its significance without explanation. From his own neck, he removed a small pouch of his own. "A medicine bundle," he explained, containing sacred herbs and a bear claw that had protected him during his escape from the school. "This has kept me safe when danger threatened," he said, placing the leather cord around Eleanor's neck. "Now it will watch over you." The exchange complete, they stood in momentary silence, neither quite ready for the final farewell, both recognizing its necessity. Finally, Dakota spoke the words that would begin their separation. "Walk with confidence," he instructed. "The path is clear, the distance short. When you reach the first building, call out. Your people will find you." Eleanor nodded, adjusting her grip on the walking stick. Will you watch until I'm safe?" "Yes," Dakota replied simply. "I will not leave until I see you found by your kind." It was the most he could offer, and Eleanor accepted it with gratitude. Taking a deep breath, she turned toward the sounds of the settlement and took her first independent steps since the storm that had separated her from the wagon train. The path was indeed, as Dakota had described, relatively level, free of major obstacles, with the musical gurgle of the creek providing a constant auditory guide on her right. Eleanor moved with purposeful strides, applying all she had learned during their journey. Her stick found depressions and obstacles before her feet encountered them, and she adjusted her path accordingly without breaking stride. As she approached the settlement's edge, the sounds of humanity grew louder, conversations, hammering, the squeal of a sawmill blade cutting timber. Dogs barked at her unfamiliar scent, alerting the townsfolk to a newcomer's approach. "Hello!" she called, as she reached what felt like a road, packed earth instead of natural ground. "Is anyone there?" A moment of silence followed, then a flurry of activity. Footsteps approached rapidly from several directions. A woman's voice called out in surprise, then a man's deeper tones asking questions Eleanor couldn't quite distinguish. "My name is Eleanor Montgomery," she announced, standing tall despite her exhaustion and disheveled appearance. "I was separated from the Berkshire wagon train during the storm last week. My husband is William Montgomery, traveling with our children." Emma and Thomas. Another moment of shocked silence, then a flood of responses. Yes, William Montgomery had arrived 3 days prior. Yes, the children were with him. They had reported Eleanor missing, presumed dead, after searching for a full day following the storm. Hands reached for her. Women's hands, gentle but insistent, guiding her toward shelter. Questions rained down around her. How had she survived? How had she found her way to town? Had she been alone all this time? Eleanor answered selectively, stating simply that she had been guided by a traveler who knew the territory. She did not mention Dakota by name or identify him as Lakota. Some truths were hers to keep, private treasures in a world too ready to tarnish what it didn't understand. They brought her to a rough-hewn building that served as the settlement's general store and community gathering place. Word of her miraculous appearance spread through Prosperity Creek with astonishing speed. Within minutes, the door burst open, and a familiar voice cried out her name. "Eleanor! My God, Eleanor!" William's arms encircled her, his embrace almost painful in its desperate strength. She felt the wet heat of his tears against her cheek, heard the broken quality of his breathing as he clutched her to his chest. Then smaller arms joined the embrace, Emma and Thomas, their high voices competing as they expressed their joy and disbelief at her return. In that moment of reunion, Eleanor felt a complex tapestry of emotions, genuine joy at holding her, children again, relief at William's safety, yet also a strange sense of distance from the life she had left behind. The woman being welcomed back to the fold was not the same one who had fallen from the wagon during the storm. That Eleanor had been replaced by someone stronger, more capable, more aware of both her limitations and her potential. How? William kept asking, his voice ragged with emotion. We searched everywhere. We thought. It's a long story, Eleanor replied, gently disentangling herself from his embrace. One better told once we're settled somewhere, private. The townsfolk provided immediate hospitality, a private room at the boarding house, hot food, clean clothes, and a physician to check Eleanor for injuries beyond the obvious cuts and bruises. Through it all, Eleanor maintained a quiet dignity that some mistook for shock, but was in fact a newfound center of calm confidence. That night, with the children finally asleep in an adjacent room, Eleanor told William a version of her journey, one that honored the truth while protecting Dakota's role in her survival. She spoke of lessons learned, challenges overcome, and the strength she had discovered within herself. William listened with increasing discomfort, his responses revealing his struggle to reconcile this new, self-possessed Eleanor with the dependent wife he had known before. "But you're safe now," he said repeatedly, as though trying to close the chapter on her ordeal. "You're back where you belong. Things can return to normal." Eleanor didn't contradict him directly, recognizing that William needed time to adjust to the changes in her, just as she needed time to reintegrate into family life. Instead, she placed her hand over his and said simply, "We're all changed by what happened, William. We can't go backward, only forward into whatever comes next." Later, when William slept, Eleanor stood by the window of their room, her fingers, finding the small medicine pouch Dakota had given her. Outside, the moon illuminated the snow-covered landscape, creating a silver path that stretched toward the hills where she had parted from her guide and unlikely brother. She wondered where he was now, if he had begun his journey to the winter camp where he hoped to find his people, or if he had sought shelter for the night before continuing onward. Had he watched until she was safely received by the townsfolk? Had he felt the same complex mixture of fulfillment and loss that she experienced as their paths diverged? Some questions would remain forever unanswered, Eleanor realized. Some connections, though severed by circumstance, would continue to resonate through the years ahead. Dakota had given her more than physical survival. He had awakened a capacity for independence, for courage, for seeing with senses beyond the eyes. As she turned back toward the bed where William slept, Eleanor made a silent promise to herself, to Dakota, to the person she had become during their journey together. She would not allow herself to be diminished by others' expectations. She would carry the wilderness-born strength within her, applying its lessons to the challenges of this new life in Prosperity Creek. The woman who had fallen from the wagon was gone forever, replaced by one who had walked through fire and ice, who had crossed the Singing River, who had formed a bond of siblinghood with a man from a world apart from her own. That woman, the real Eleanor Montgomery, would face whatever came next with the quiet confidence born of true survival. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first notes of another approaching storm. Eleanor listened to its voice, hearing echoes of all she had experienced, the howling blizzard that had separated her from the wagon train, the whisper of pine forests, the roar of wildfire, the song of the river that had nearly claimed her life. Echoes on the wind, connecting, past to present, reminding her of who she had been and who she had become. Eleanor smiled slightly, one hand touching the medicine pouch at her throat, the other reaching for the new walking stick leaning against the wall, balancing between worlds, between identities, between the life she had lost and the one she was about to begin. In the distance, a wolf howled, a single haunting note that might have been a farewell, or perhaps a reminder that wilderness and civilization were not as separate as humans pretended. Eleanor listened until the sound faded, then turned away from the window, taking her first steps into the future that awaited. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.